The 561st edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony coming at you live here on a Wednesday night. Here to really talk about just the negative energy, the negative attention that Carolina's offseason has gathered so far. It really picked up steam, the past couple of days when I guess the financial terms of how much Carolina has spent this offseason were made public. Some guys that, work in the national space really voicing their concerns over where this roster stands in comparison to how much money Carolina has invested in the roster for the upcoming season. We'll talk about two former Tar Heels finding new homes, in the transfer portal. That happened since the last time we spoke. And then we'll end the show with the tease of the offseason series we're going to start, which will debut next week. So we got a fun show, a busy show, and we appreciate all you guys here joining us live on a Wednesday night. We start with the pod thought of the day, and we go to Phil Jackson for that pod thought, and that thought is, quote, "Good teams become great ones when the members trust each other enough to surrender the me for the we." I do think when you look at the guys that Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, and this staff targeted this offseason, they brought in guys that I do think are prototypical, like Hubert Davis guys. These are guys that I think they're trying to fit the culture that, quite frankly, Hubert Davis is still trying to establish going into year 5 as Carolina's coach. And so I think, you're looking for this roster to become one that is the team. It is a team concept. I think, if you want to look at this roster and complain about something, if you want to criticize, it might be the fact that there may not be that certified go-to guy. But I do think with all the plethora of scoring options that Hubert Davis and Jim Tanner have assembled, it's going to be the greater good for, the success on the court. Because if we're being quite honest, when you look at the roster last year, and if I would have taken the Carolina blue glasses off and really looked at the roster, the issues that they dealt with were very visible. But I was so concerned about getting an individual player back in RJ Davis, as opposed to seeing, do they put together the best team? And that answer was obviously no. With the amount of losses Carolina stacked up in the non-conference season, the number of losses in general with 14 by the time the season came to an end, with that opening and that round of 64 loss to Ole Miss, I do think what Carolina has tried to do is put together a roster that is going to benefit from having multiple guys that can score the basketball, that can play great individual team defense, rebound, whatever it is. And I think that if these guys, and they're already on the court together, we're starting to see the footage come out of the summer sessions that Carolina is going under right now. If they surrender the me for the we, I do think this roster is better set up to have the type of success we're used to having and we expect to have this upcoming year.
Yeah, I mean, I think they lack that true star right now as we sit here in the offseason. And I think a lot of people are looking for that guy to already be on the roster. But I don't think it's the worst position to be in to have guys that are on the precipice of potentially being stars, like a Caleb Wilson, a five-star prospect coming out of high school, someone that you would think if he can live up to expectations, and especially with the amount of minutes that should be available for him, if he's able to do that, he could certainly become that star for you. Maybe it's Kyan Evans, a guy who really started to show the scoring power late in his sophomore season at Colorado State this past year. Or potentially it's the 21, soon to be 22-year-old Luka Bogovac on the wing that, it comes over from the Adriatic League. That's a league that's produced some really great players, including Nikola Jokic over the years. And maybe he's a guy that, with all the experience that he gains, turns into a star. That doesn't even take into account a guy like Henry Vasar, who we think has all the potential of being an NBA caliber big. I know that there was one, I forget if it was Jonathan Gavoni or somebody that covers the NBA draft, that said that if he would have came out this year, he would have been drafted. He was a draftable player with what he's shown so far. And, that was really only the beginning of his career, the first 3 years of his career at Arizona. So now, with him potentially having this year, maybe even next year at Carolina, this is a guy that could potentially grow into a star player for you as well. So there are a multitude of different options that I think are there, which is a different spot than Carolina's at from last year. But does that mean that it's a worse spot? I don't really know. I don't think so. I think that it means that Carolina is maybe in a similar spot to where they were last offseason. But I do think overall, when I look at the roster, I do think that they're in a better spot just because I think there is more depth on this roster. I think that, just about everybody that's on this roster is playable. Where, there were times, especially late in the Roy era and then early in the Hubert era, where you didn't really have a roster where you could play just about every guy. I didn't think you could do that even last year. This year, it's hard to find a guy that's on the roster that you say to yourself, yeah, I don't really see him playing much this year for Carolina. Maybe Isaiah Dennis. That might be the one guy that you look and say, especially coming off the injury last year at the high school level, maybe he needs a little time, but everybody else is going to be able to play. So I really do think with that added depth, that was something that they really wanted to go out and find. And then some of the other things that they added, which we'll probably talk about here throughout the night, I think that this roster is in a better spot and is more well-positioned to be a team that competes in the ACC this year and gets themselves, back into the conversation of one of the better teams in the ACC, and at least a team that safely makes the NCAA tournament each and every year.
Yeah, I have said really since, you landed Kyan Evans and Visar that I thought this roster was shaping up to be better, more dynamic than last year. And ever since I have offered and voiced that opinion, it's been met with a lot of resistance, whether it's at the station that we work at, whether it's on our own platform here from Carolina fans, on social media, and the like. The national media has been very critical of what Carolina has done, or maybe in their eyes, they haven't done this offseason. We've talked a lot about the guys from the Field of 68, Rob Doster, Jeff Goodman, even my guys from the beloved Ion College Basketball Podcast. When I hear Gary Parrish, Matt Norlander talk about what Carolina has done this offseason, they haven't been overly impressed with what Hubert Davis was able to do with this roster overhaul. I think that criticism, it went up a notch earlier this week when, Inside Carolina made it known the investment that Carolina has made in terms of its basketball roster for the upcoming season, payroll that is going to touch north of 14 million. For the amount of guys that Carolina, which right now they have 12 guys on scholarship, and those 12 scholarship players compromise the $14 million, more than triple than what Carolina invested into its roster last season. And that $14 million number puts them inside the top 5 in terms of college basketball roster spending for the upcoming season. Jeff Goodman says, because not all the numbers have come out and been finalized, it could be as high as number 2, only trailing Kentucky, who has invested almost $20 million in terms of NIL money into their roster for the upcoming season. We know that Louisville was in about the 8 to 10 range. Same for Florida. We know that Duke last year had a lot of money that wasn't made public until they made the Final Four. That roster, compromised of almost $20 million in their run to the Final Four a year ago. So, but you would think that seeing Carolina invest would be received with positive energy, and Carolina would be praised for spending the way that a blue blood program should spend. And that just quite frankly hasn't been the case. Even Jim Tanner has come under attack because his salary has been made public. Carolina is paying their first-time GM $850,000. And a lot of criticism from Carolina fans and the national media saying, you paid this guy $850,000, and this is the roster that he was able to compromise. When you see that negative energy, Jeff Goodman said it on his Twitter today that $14 million number is very underwhelming when you look at the talent that exists. What do you make of that? Because I thought when I saw that number, we would be celebrating and praising Carolina for investing the way that they should, but that has not been the case, whether it's locally or nationally by the media.
I mean, I got to admit, the first time when I saw it, I did say to myself, really? This roster that they put together and there's $14 million that's put into it? But then when you think about it and you see all the guys that Carolina's bringing in, and again, the approach that I said that they took, where you've got 11 guys that we can legitimately look at right now and say, if the season started today, we think that they would play some sort of role. I think all the way down to Derek Dixon. I think he is too good of a shooter to not play some sort of role on this team. So you're talking about all of those guys are going to come in and make some sort of impact for you this year. I think when you put it in that perspective, okay, it makes a little bit more sense why maybe they aren't paying the top dollar for certain guys. They wanted to completely overhaul this roster. And you got to think there's 9 new guys on this roster, 10 if you really count Zayden High, who wasn't on the roster this past year. So that means there's 2 guys that are on the roster from a year ago, Seth Trimble and James Brown. Seth Trimble's a guy that, he probably is costing you a pretty decent amount. He's a contributor from a year ago that you wanted to keep around. James Brown, that's a guy that really didn't play all that much last year. So even him, that's almost basically a new player as well. So you had to spread your money out between all of those different guys. And it probably wasn't cheap going and getting Kyan Evans. It's never cheap going and getting a point guard, especially in the ways that we're seeing these guys get paid now in college basketball. And I think that, going out and getting some of these other guys probably wasn't cheap either. Luka Bogavac's a guy that's making money over in the Adriatic League. You probably had to pay him a decent amount to get him on the roster as well. Same thing with Henry Vasar to leave Arizona. A good situation there. We know that that's probably one of the guys that Carolina, especially with how quickly things worked with him, we know that was probably a guy that Carolina was trying to get into the portal, was having conversations with while he was still on the Arizona roster, and they probably had to offer a certain amount of money to get him to commit. And then everybody forgets, dude, Caleb Wilson costs money. I mean, maybe it isn't as much as some of these top portal guys. I'm not sure. I don't think he's anywhere in the neighborhood of a guy like Cooper Flagg, like what we saw this past year. If some of those numbers are actually correct, I don't think he's going to make that type of money. Now, a lot of that was from NIL, but I know that Duke paid him a lot of money as well. Caleb Wilson is a guy that's getting paid a significant amount, though. And so this really doesn't shock me once you start to add up all of the guys that Carolina added to the roster. I think the bigger concern would be if Carolina hadn't brought in a lot of guys. Like, to me, if they went out and got one big name and then surrounded it with, a bunch of low-priced guys, and it ended up being like 6 or 7 guys. I mean, this roster, you kind of ask yourself where this roster is at, because at that point, you don't have the money to continue to add to the roster. It's far from a full roster, and you don't have the depth that you have now. So I think that's what people got to realize, is that they wanted to go out and get a deep roster. They wanted to go out and get a roster that was taller, and they wanted to go out and get a roster that could shoot. And the biggest thing with all of that, the depth and the guys that could shoot, was they wanted it to be multiple guys, not just one. So I think that's part of the reason why you look at this right now and you might say to yourself as a fan, really? They spent $14 million on this roster? But the thing is that when you average it out, it really isn't that much per player. And it makes a little bit of sense once you start to add it up, why Carolina is sitting here with a $14 million roster, and it looks the way that it does.
Yeah, look, there's no denying that when you see that number, it's a pretty gaudy number when you're talking about college athletics. And that's a really big number for college basketball. But I think, it's important to remember we were all sitting here in February, into March, even when this team made the tournament, saying that overhaul was needed. You needed to get rid of the majority of the players that were on this team a year ago and bring in new ones. Well, guess what? That costs money. Like, you're not bringing in – there is not a player that Carolina acquired this offseason that they did not give a substantial financial investment in. If there's a guy on the roster that's not making any money, it's probably Zayden High, just considering the fact of how he rejoined the team and the off-the-court circumstances. But if we're being honest, that's probably not realistic either. He's probably getting some form of financial commitment as well, because that's the day and age that we live in. I don't think that this is going to be the spending every single year. If it is, that's a good thing. Like, you should be encouraged if you're a Carolina fan, because we spent the last year and a half, 2 years worried and concerned. Were they ever going to pony up the money? Were they ever going to invest and spend the way that you have to spend now to win? And I think they answered all those doubts and all those concerns this offseason. But I think in a more ideal world, Hubert Davis isn't overhauling his roster the way he had to do this year and bringing in the 9 new guys that help really push that total up to $14 million, because you had to give, I think, a pretty substantial financial commitment to Seth Trimble. This number would be higher if Ben Allen Lubin would have remained with the program, because Carolina had already made a financial commitment to him until he sold his soul and chased a check to go play for Will Wade at NC State. More about that later on in the program. So I don't doubt that, when you see that number, it is going to be attention worthy, and it's going to grab your eye. And if Carolina doesn't win, that'll be the number we talk about the most, is a $14 million roster that is not producing results on the court. But I don't think that number should strike you as surprise when you look at how many guys Carolina brought in, the caliber of guys that Carolina brought in, where you're talking about a top 10 recruit out of high school, and you're talking about 2 NBA caliber or NBA draft caliber players in Visar from Arizona, and then Luka Bogovac, who was weighing going pro after his most recent season in the Adriatic League. Like, if you're going to recruit those types of guys, whether they're out of the high school range or out of the transfer portal, you have to exceed what a potential NBA contract would be if they were in the second round. And a second round NBA contract is about, I think it's like $578,000. is what a second-round contract in the NBA gets you right now. You have to exceed that, and probably substantially. And so I think Carolina did that, and you should be encouraged by that, because we all were sitting here when Carolina hired Bill Belichick, and we saw the reported financial commitment to football, and a lot of Carolina fans were concerned, well, they're going to go all in on football and not invest in basketball. And I told you guys then, and I'll reiterate it now, there was never a scenario where that was going to happen. They're going all in on football primarily to have more money at their disposal to invest in the basketball program. Like, yes, I do think Carolina wants to win, and I think they are committed to winning in football, and that's a great thing. We celebrate that. We champion that. It's about dang time that the athletic department valued winning on the football field. But that also came with them understanding if you invest and win at a high level in football, you have more money, more resources at your disposal to commit to basketball. That's why the SEC has exploded as a basketball conference. It's because they go all in on football. They get the revenue. They take that revenue, that extra money. They invest it in basketball and their coaches, their facilities, and their players. And it's why they put a record number of teams in the NCAA tournament this past March Madness. So it's going to get criticized, and I understand it. But I do think that the number isn't going to be that number every single offseason. And you should be encouraged by the investment that you've seen from Carolina, because there was reason to doubt if they were going to invest that way, because we hadn't seen them invest that way before. It's also a number that right now is lower than what it could be when you factor in the fact that there are still 3 more scholarships available for Carolina to add to the roster. Now, I think we are of the opinion that they are done. I don't think they're going to add to what they've done this offseason. But if they were to just let's just say fill out the roster and fill out the scholarship total, which is 15, and they're not doing it with giving walk-on scholarships, they're going out and bringing in recruits from the transfer portal still. I mean, you're talking about that rate. You would be talking about a roster that would comprise of at least 16 to 18, maybe $20 million. And so while you're looking at that $14 million number and you're raising your eyebrow, it could be much more substantial if Hubert Davis and Jim Tanner said, "Hey, we're not done. We got more money. Let's go get 3 more scholarship players."
It could be. I think that there are certainly some guys that, Carolina could have looked at. I think now it's probably too late. Most of those guys, I mean, there are going to be some guys that are still trapped in the portal. And if you're really interested in any of them, then sure, why not go out and get them? But I don't think that there is going to be anybody else that's coming in. I think that they're probably pretty satisfied ultimately with where the roster is at. And you should probably be too. I mean, you look at this roster and how it's built. I mean, the front court, I think, is probably the one area that's the thinnest at this point. But even with that, I don't think that that's necessarily that thin. You've still got Vasar, who you would expect is going to start. James Brown would probably be his backup, and Zayden High is the guy that you can use if you need him. High is also going to be a guy that can help you at the 4, where you've got Caleb Wilson, who we're projecting is going to be your starter. If not, if for some reason they don't think that he's ready, which I don't think that's something that you can think if you're this coaching staff. He has to be ready. He's got to be your guy, because I think if you put another 5-star on the bench and leave him there for any portion of the season, that could hurt you recruiting-wise. I think that he's going to be your starter. You'll have Jaron Stevenson coming off the bench, who you're hoping will be able to build off of the potential that he had coming out of high school. And then you've got High to provide a little bit of extra depth there. The wing, you've got that hole covered now with Luka Bogovac, as well as Jonathan Powell, who I do think it has the ability to play there, will play there a pretty decent amount for Carolina. And then you just go into that backcourt, man, and there's so many different options that you have back there. You know that Kyan Evans, Seth Trimble's probably going to be your backcourt starting tandem. But then from there, you got Jaden Young, who I think is probably the most under-discussed player, but one of the most underrated pickups that Carolina made this offseason, because the way that he closed his season, we talk about the way that Kyan Evans closed his year, and as we should. I mean, it was a 14-game sample size. Jaden Young, the final 7 games of his season, were pretty successful as well on the offensive end of the floor. Wasn't the most efficient player, but certainly was able to score the ball. So he's got that capability coming off the bench for you, a guy that can really light it up. And then Derek Dixon, who I talked about, who I really like as a shooter, can play on the ball as well, can share the basketball at a high level. And then Isaiah Dennis, as a guy that's a really long guard at 6'5", if he ends up factoring in. The one thing that I will say is that we've gotten to the point, I was asked this question earlier today on my show, the Wes and Walker show on WFNZ, which you guys can hear weekdays from 12 to 3. At this point, there's no way that Hubert Davis has any excuse. You've got the money now. You've got $14 million invested in this roster. This is as deep of a roster as you've had. This is as big of a roster as you've had. You've accomplished all of your goals this offseason when it came to building this roster, as far as we can tell. This means that the excuses for him are out the window. He's got to win this year. If he doesn't, then I think that's when you start having that legitimate conversation about his future and whether or not it's actually going to work out. Because before this, we were saying he doesn't have a GM. He doesn't have the money invested. Well, now you've got all of that stuff there. Now it's about actually turning this roster into one that can win. I think he's going to be able to do it, but I do think that is one of the more interesting things to monitor with this season, because once we found out that he spent $14 million, that excuse, or not even excuse, but that reason as to why Carolina was not able to be successful, that's another one that's off the checklist. And now Hubert Davis is is needing to show that that was really the reason why this roster wasn't as successful a year ago.
You're not wrong. I wrote that down. It was one of the questions I had for tonight's episode was how much added pressure is there on Hubert with this financial commitment? Let's also not run away from the fact that if Carolina didn't hire a GM and that they wouldn't have invested $14 million in the players that they acquired and retained, the pressure would not be any less. With the up and down nature that he has endured as Carolina's head coach. Because, he has not consistently met the standard of what we expect. And look, there's a scenario where he may not meet my standard, my expectation this year, but if he wins 25 games and Carolina advances and wins a game or two in the tournament, then Hubert Davis isn't going anywhere, and you should feel confident that they have the right guy running and leading this program. So you're not wrong. That I think this adds to the desire and the demand to see results. But if they would not have gone if they wouldn't have invested the way that they did, there would still be pressure on him to win. A couple of comments here that I want to address. We're getting a lot of comments. We appreciate all you guys that are tuning in live with us. Or AJI1 says the biggest concern may not be the money. When in a sense you build your team around straight portal kids and a few recruits, you hope they gel together and become a team. Money changes players and dynamics. I think the one thing you have to, I would say to that, because you're not wrong, when you only got 2 guys coming back and you've got so many newbies coming in, like, okay, how are they going to gel? But the best team that Hubert Davis put together in terms of start to finish were, yes, you had RJ Davis and Armando Bacot, who were established veterans on the roster, but your 2 biggest acquisitions were not even high school players. They were transfer portal guys in Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan, guys that fit the culture and fit what Hubert Davis was looking for on the court and off the court, and what he wants in a Carolina basketball player. I think this is where them having the expanded offseason is a benefit, where they can get together in the summer. They start practice now in late September as opposed to mid-October. They'll have more time. And they will go on trips and do events that is basically forced chemistry, where you're doing these things to try to get this group that was put together via the portal to try to get them to come together before you start playing basketball games. Also, this is where not playing the demanding schedule that you played last year will come a benefit, because if there are growing pains in November and December, you'll be doing it while you're beating up on mid-major competition, as opposed to playing a schedule last year, which was basically a ranked opponent, it felt like, every other time. Another one that I wanted to address from ICE_919, this team is built to win. Evans and Bogovac can share the go-to guy duties. They have size, ball handling, rebounding, defense, and shooting. You don't need a superstar team to win the Natty. Just look at Florida. I said it at the Open. If there's one thing, maybe you look at this roster and you question is who's your go-to guy, who's your certified bucket getter. For me, I think that guy is Luka Bogovac. I think he will be the guy that if Carolina's in a tight situation when they're running their 4-minute offense, he will be the guy that the ball is designed to get to first. But if not, you've got that secondary ball handler and scorer in Kai and Evans, something that this roster did not have last season. The thing that you have to like about what this roster looks like on paper is Hubert Davis said at the end of the season when he did his final radio show with Jones Angel, we need to add size and we need to add shooting. Those are the two biggest things we have to address this offseason. I don't know how you look at this roster and say they did not achieve that. Like, they got bigger. Like, they have a lineup that they could play where you could have three, guys 6'11" or taller on the court simultaneously. And I expect to see that lineup on the floor this season, just because when you have that type of size at your disposal, you need to use it, because how many teams in college basketball will have that type of size to match it? The shooting is the biggest thing. Like Carolina last year, because Cade Tyson was such a miss in the transfer portal, did not have a consistent perimeter shooter outside of RJ Davis. And because teams were gearing up to take his three-point shooting away, he never even shot the ball efficiently from behind the three-point line, and it really hindered Carolina's offense as the season moved along. They've got a plethora of guys that I think can shoot 36, 37% from behind the three-point line. And if that happens and they're getting consistent production from 4 to 5 guys on the perimeter, this team is going to be hard to defend, because you can only defend so many perimeter shooters without giving up driving lanes for guards and leaving bigs, unmanned down low to get easy buckets, dunks, and layups. So, I think that's a positive comment. And I think you need to see more of that, because this roster may not have a superstar. It may not have a first or second team All-American, but if it comes together the way that Hubert Davis envisioned, this is a roster I think primed to compete at the top of the ACC and be a top 10 to 15 team nationally next year.
Yeah, I mean, they checked off all those boxes. That's really the thing that they needed to do. The other area that I wonder a little bit about them is defensively. I just don't know how good this team is going to be defensively. I don't think they're going to be as good as they were probably last year in terms of just the guys that are actually on the floor. Last year you had Drake Powell. That was a really good defensive player. You had, Seth Trimble out there with him. But there's some of those, the perimeter defense is really the thing that I'm worried about right now, outside of maybe that who is your lead scorer. But to me, I'm not even that concerned about that, because I think that'll get worked out. Because to me, I'm not as convicted on a guy as that we have on the roster as being the lead scorer. Like, I wouldn't say, yeah, I'm all in on Caleb Wilson. I believe that he's going to be the lead scorer. There's no questions asked in my mind. Same thing with Kai and Evans or Luka Bogovac. But I do think that from that trio, there will be someone that will step up and be your lead scorer. And then the other guys will be pretty close behind them in terms of the scoring output, which people will say, well, is that really a great thing? Yeah, you want balanced scoring on your roster. You don't want to have one guy that's really controlling everything. because when you do and you put so much in the hands of one player, I mean, we've seen it throughout college basketball. I mean, just look at last year, some of the teams in the ACC. One of the guys that we wanted to go out and get, and a guy that we really thought would be a great fit here. And, I still think he would have fit well here because I think Carolina would have been able to score outside of him, was Andre Stojakovic. Look at the situation that he was in at Cal last year. He was easily their best player. He was clearly their leading scorer. But because that team didn't have depth, there was absolutely no way that they were able to win games. They had no help beside them. You go and look at the team that was referenced by our guy in the YouTube comments, Florida. I mean, there wasn't a clear guy that really stood out, until later in the season when Walter Clayton Jr. started to take over. But even him, I mean, you had him at 18.3 points per game. I mean, if you could get one of these guys to average somewhere in that neighborhood, and then you get your second and third leading scorers like we saw with Florida this past year to average 14.4 a game and 13.3 a game, that's the neighborhood that you're kind of looking. And I don't even think you necessarily need someone to be Walter Clayton Jr. This is the thing, and I know it sounds sad, but the expectation for this team going into next year, in my mind, is not going to be this team needs to win a national championship. It's sad that we've reached that point, and we're hoping that we soon return to that point where those are the expectations. Make the Final Four and win a national championship every single year. That's the point that we want to return to. But going into next year, that's not going to be the expectation. And if that's not the expectation, having balanced scoring and not necessarily having that guy that's standing out like we've had these past couple of years with a guy like RJ Davis isn't necessarily the worst thing. The perimeter defense is the one thing that I think we need answers from early in the season. That's where we're going to have to find guys that can really defend, because I think Seth Trimble can do it, and there's no doubt about that. Caleb Wilson is a guy that can guard on the perimeter as well. We saw that in the All-American game. Outside of that, I don't really know about the rest of this group and how great they are defensively. We know that's not a strength of Bogovacs. Kyan Evans, I think that's something that really came with the system at Colorado State. But I got to be honest, I didn't watch a lot of him at Colorado State. In his film that we watched of him, it was a short video, and there wasn't really a lot of focus on what he does defensively. So I need to see more. And same thing with a guy like Jaren Stevenson. I don't know just how good of a defender he can be, because he really wasn't that at Alabama, although the system didn't really call for it. So I think finding out whether some of those guys are good defenders on the perimeter, that's going to be important for Carolina. But everything else, the size and the shooting, they definitely checked off. And I believe the scoring as well. So I think you're in a really good spot with this roster, and there should be some positivity about this group. Is this group going to jump out off the page to all these national people when they're talking about who they expect to be the best team in college basketball this year? No. But I'm going to tell you, is that necessarily the worst thing for Carolina to not have a ton of expectations? No, I think it honestly works in their favor for them to be doubted. We saw last year in the NCAA tournament, granted, it only worked for one game, but that really played a role in Carolina being able to win the way that they did in Dayton. I think it could be like that this year with this roster, where coming into the year, you play those clips in the locker room. You say no one is trusting you. Everyone thinks that you are a team of slappies that were thrown together, and that this isn't necessarily going to be a group that's going to be able to even get us to the NCAA tournament. That should be the mindset in that room. And that should be the chip on the shoulder going into the season. And hopefully that's honestly what comes of it. I just hate that so much of it is coming from its own fan base.
Yeah, I know this is going to surprise you guys. I'm excited. I'm optimistic. I'm giddy. I'm ready to see what this roster looks like, what this team looks like, because I think they're going to be really fun to watch. I think they're going to play a fun version of offense. I think they're going to be underrated defensively. And I think this is going to be a group that will progress as the season moves along. One of those prototypical Roy Williams teams that, they're not going to peak in November and December, and that's a good thing. We want to peak in March. I think this roster is destined to do that, but we got a long way to go. Still a lot of offseason time to get here before we even get to talking about the results on the court. Since we last spoke, 2 former Tar Heels have found new basketball homes. One of them was, we knew he was going here all along. He finally made it official. The other one kind of surprised me. We'll start with Vin Allen Lubin. We knew for the past, 2-3 weeks that he was going to NC State. Pretty much once Carolina all but moved off from him internally. Because I do think when he first entered the portal, Carolina was, I think, committed to retaining him and bringing him back. But as that process played out, they did decide to move on from him. And he now becomes the first guy in the portal era to go from Carolina directly to NC State. Dontrez Styles had the buffer. He went to Georgetown first, and then he went and played last year for Kevin Keats and the Wolfpack. And, this is a guy that, we valued when the season ended, that we wanted back. He said he wanted to be back, but said it had to be at the right financial number. And when you look at Vin Allen Lubin's decision, you can't help but say I don't think this is him believing in Will Wade more than he believes in Hubert Davis. I don't think he desires to play for NC State more than he desired to play for North Carolina. But they had more money they were willing to pay him individually. And you say whatever you want about that. This is where, because we knew this decision was happening, us not getting to play them twice really stinks. Because I would like to see that reaction, had he returned to Chapel Hill, because I do think he would have gotten booed very loudly. Seth Trimble commented on his post. He gave him the gif of where he looked at Dontrez Styles and kind of punked him in Chapel Hill a year ago. I had to talk about this on Monday, and I said that Vin Allen Lubin is maybe the first player in college basketball history to transfer as many times as he did, and at each and every single stop, he lessened his education value at a new basketball home. Going from Vanderbilt to, from Notre Dame to Carolina, now to NC State. What do you make of Vin Allen Lubin officially landing in Raleigh?
Well, yeah, the degree that he's actually going to end up with is not going to be nearly as valuable as any of the other ones that he would have been able to get had he stayed at those schools. But alas, look, man, in all seriousness, I just don't. This doesn't rub me as wrong as it would some people, because he wasn't here long enough. He was only here 1 year. If this was a guy that was here multiple seasons, if this was somebody that had become a staple of Carolina and ends up transferring, if this is Seth Trimble, then we have problems. We have big problems, because then there's some legitimate anger, because this guy, is so tied to Chapel Hill. He said the previous offseason how much he loved it here and wanted to stay here, all that kind of stuff. Then there would be some legitimate animosity. Man, this is a dude that's just a journeyman. He is going to be on, if he gets, God forbid, he got another year of eligibility somehow, this dude would be on another roster next year. It wouldn't be he's coming back to NC State. It's not going to happen. I don't see it. He's chasing the money. It is what it is. Carolina didn't want him. You can't be, that offended by it. You wanted Vasar over him. That was your guy that you went out and got. So you can't be offended that he went and found somewhere where he's going to get to start. That's the thing, is that if he was going to somewhere where he wasn't going to start, then I would understand that. Then to me, it would make a little more sense why you could be a little bit chapped by this. But he's going to a school where he's going to start. I don't care what anybody says about Paul Mbaya or whatever the hell his name is. Somebody tried to tell me that he's better than Vasar. Dude, this guy's an unranked kid out of the Congo, who could end up being a really solid player. But when you compare him to Dame Sarr is a 5-star prospect coming out of Italy that's going to Duke. Luka Bogovac, a 4-star prospect coming out of the Adriatic League. This is a guy that's unranked. So that tells me that they really don't know a whole lot about him. I don't think that he's going to start over Vin Allen Lubin. That's why they brought Vin Allen there. He's going to go there and start, and we'll see. But, yeah, I would love for Carolina to be playing this team twice, because I think, he would deserve to be booed. He's going to be a one of the guys that a lot of the hate's going to be focused on. For me, I don't hate him any more than I hate any other player on that roster, to be honest, because I just, one, I don't want any of their players to succeed. I am unlike you. You are someone that thinks that them being good is good for the rivalry, is good for the conference, and that's something we should want. I don't. I hate them. I hate everything about that athletic program. I want them to fail, and I want their fans to suffer every single year. I want those fans to ask themselves, crying in the mirror every day, why do I root for this athletic program? Because they just suck that much ass. That's what I'm hoping for. But so to me, like, I just hope he sucks like any other state player. There's no comments that he's made. That was the other thing with Dontrez Styles. Remember when Dontrez Styles left, he had some questionable comments about not being played enough and stuff like that. That's not at all what we've heard from Vin Allen Lubin. Now, if Vin Allen wants to give us some comments like that, then we can surely put you up there on the hater board that we have, along with some of the other program legends like Rashad McCants and some of those other guys. We can definitely put you up there if you want to be up there. But that's the other thing. I don't think he stoked the flame. And so I don't really think that you should be that mad at him yet, maybe until we get on the basketball court this season and we see something different.
Yeah, I can't wait to read the Pack Pride message boards when they figure out that he can't catch a bounce pass to save his life. And he's costing them 6 to 8 turnovers and all that stuff, because I don't think their fan base will be as kind to him as we were. We knew he was going there. Cade Tyson, though, lands at Minnesota. And I gotta tell you, and I know Minnesota is not a basketball power. That's a program that in my lifetime has never been relevant. I could probably count on 3 fingers how many times they've made the NCAA tournament. I was surprised that he stayed at the power conference level with how much he struggled at Carolina, and how he, looked literally scared at times to play against power conference competition in the ACC, mind you, that was down as bad as it's been in the last decade or so. I never thought he would go to the Big Ten and play power conference basketball. I'm happy for him. Like, this is a guy that I think the downside of the time that we live in is we know there was a significant financial commitment that Carolina made to him. He was their top transfer portal target last offseason, and it just didn't work out. For whatever reason, he did not transition to Carolina the way that some other group of 5 transfers have transitioned before. But and I hope he goes there and has success and regains his confidence and looks like the player that we all were excited about when he transferred to us out of Belmont. But I do got to say, like, in the back of my mind, I thought this guy was going to stay close to home because he's from the Monroe area where we're from. Maybe go play at Charlotte, ECU, at wherever. I never had it in my head that he was going to the Big Ten, but that's where Cade Tyson lands, becoming the second Tar Heel to transfer from UNC to Minnesota under Hubert Davis.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how shocked I am by this because, I mean, Minnesota is basically where they're at right now, at least at the start of the Nico Medved era. They are basically power conference adjacent. They have been really, really bad these last couple of years. And I think he probably looked at Dawson Garcia's success there and said to himself, do I think that I can be that guy? I mean, the thing for him is all he's got to do is find his rhythm from 3. If he can find his rhythm from the outside, he's going to be successful wherever he goes. So I don't really think it mattered where he landed. He's just got to be able to shoot the 3 ball at a high enough rate in order for him to be able to succeed, because there's not really much else to his game. He's not a great defender. He's not a guy that can really score off the dribble. He could do that a little bit when he was at Belmont, but here at this level, that's just not there for him. But I think he could go there and have some nice success. I hope he does. I'm with you. I'm rooting for him to go there and really show everybody that, yeah, the year at Carolina, it was just not the right fit. A team like Minnesota is a good fit for him. And you never know. That's a weird team where, I mean, look, they have been in the NCAA tournament 6 times. during this quarter century. Most of them have come under Richard Pitino. I think Richard Pitino is a really, really good coach. I think Nico Medved is probably not that far behind him. Both guys went head-to-head in the Mountain West this past year. Medved had his number a couple of times. I think he's a good coach that really is going to be able to find some decent success there if he can just get the talent there. I think that's going to be a question in this era of college basketball. But, I don't know, man. I don't think it's the worst fit that I've seen for him. I just, I'm with you. I think going down to the mid-major level maybe would have given him a chance to become one of the better scoring options. But hell, maybe he likes just being a piece that can shoot the three ball, and he's hoping that he can find a way to become what he was for Belmont, at least as an outside threat for a team that could contend in a power conference this year.
It'd be interesting to see how he translates to that level of basketball. But unlike, for Ben Allen Lubin, I will be rooting for the success of K. Tyson at his new basketball home. It's very rare we do this on the show where we talk about like what we're going to do next, but what we're about to do for the offseason. And we, in our brief history as the Four Corners podcast, we've never really done an off-season series that we committed the entire summer to. We're doing that, though, this off-season, and I'm pretty excited about it. This type of topic gets brought up a lot during when you're trying to generate off-season conversation, but I do think, for what and how we're going to do it, I think it's going to be a fun, engaging series. So starting next week, we are going to discuss the biggest what-ifs in Carolina basketball history. And when I first thought about it, I just thought it would be an all-encompassing 45-minute to an hour episode. And then the more that I thought about the topic, I researched the topic, I thought there was a lot there for us to go decade by decade. And so we're going to do it in what I consider the modern era of Carolina basketball, when Carolina basketball became what we know it as today. And that started in the 1950s with the arrival of Frank McGuire, the 1957 national championship season, the hiring of Dean Smith as an assistant that really set the program up to become, in my opinion, the premier program in college basketball. And so starting next week, we'll be here once a week doing the biggest what-ifs for Carolina basketball by decade, from the 1950s through the 2010s, because we can't do the 2020 decade, of course, because we're only halfway through it. So pretty excited about that. We'll get a chance for you guys to give your feedback. We'll have some social media posts that go up about it. We want y'all to be really involved and engaged with this topic, because I think the more feedback we have, the more life it'll breathe into the off-season series. So it's very rare that we kind of do a programming note about what's to come, but I'm pretty excited about this, and hopefully you guys will be very active with us, because we'll be on here live one day, during the week, talking about the biggest what-ifs in Carolina basketball history. With that, that's going to wrap up this edition of the show. In the meantime, guys, we're going to direct you to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where all the news and notes from Carolina basketball can be found. We had you covered with the Luka Bogovats commitment over the weekend. It does appear that Carolina is done adding to the roster for this upcoming season, but recruiting is about to pick up in a major way with the summer AAU circuits, starting to heat up. Carolina is going to be active, looking to start adding to the 2026 recruiting class. So I'll have you covered with all of that. Anthony's keeping you up to date on all things Carolina football. They're also in a pretty big recruiting stretch as well for 2026. Had some decommitments over the weekend that maybe caught us by surprise, and we had you covered with all that news and notes as well. So we still encourage you to get to the website. That's Heel Tough Blog every single day for the latest and the best coverage of Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast, and we will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball off season. So with that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Doing Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening, And as always, go Tar Heels.